Thanks so much, Leah, and welcome everyone. We're so glad to welcome you today to this webinar. As Leah said, this is our last webinar of GLR week, so of course we saved a really great one to close us out, so we're so glad you're here. Before I introduce our panelists and moderator, I just want to give a few brief remarks, and then I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers. So I first want to acknowledge that we did invite an individual who couldn't join us today, but we're excited to have him in the future. And that is Dr. Luis Curata of Teachers College, Columbia University, who's an expert and researcher on these issues, as is all of our speakers today. So we look forward to having him with us for future conversations. As Leah had mentioned, we will have a continuation of the series, and so he'll join us for one of those future sessions. And for today's conversation, we're really excited to have this conversation about this idea of parents as curators of their children's education. And the panelists will kind of speak to what they feel that means. And then to tease out why we are seeing more parents doing this, what the trends look like across these different options we now see, and what are the implications and opportunities for students and their families as this trend continues to grow. So today you'll get to hear from a great group of panelists who study, write about, and influence this trend of parent curation. They will share some overall trends and broad national context of why and how parents are increasingly curating their children's education. They'll mention charters and micro schools. We'll do a deeper dive on open enrollment and look at that in certain states. We'll talk about education savings accounts and homeschooling. And they'll also share case studies of certain states as well. And then they will reflect on what are the implications of this on equity and accountability as it relates to really just the vibrancy of our system of public schools as we think about how to make sure that we take care of our public schools at the same time that we're offering these different options. And finally, they'll discuss the opportunities for students and families that this brings, and what they feel is really needed on the ground level and local and state levels to really help parents access these opportunities. So with that grounding, I want to go ahead and now introduce today's guests. So we have Darrell Bradford, who is traveling and gracious to join us while he's traveling. And he is the president of 50 CAN, which stands for the 50 State Campaign for Achievement Now. So welcome, Darrell. We have Michael Chartier, who's Policy Director of Education Choice with Excel and Ed, and he's based in Indiana. So welcome, Michael. We have Robin Lake, who's Director of Center on Reinventing Public Education with, excuse me, with ASU. Welcome, Robin. And Hallie Potter, who's Director of Pre-K-12 Education Policy and Senior Fellow at the Century Foundation. Welcome, Hallie. And last but not least, I want to introduce our moderator today, and that is Bruno Mano, PhD. So I want to just give a quick bio of Bruno so you have a sense of his background and his very, very good qualifications to lead this conversation today. So Bruno is currently Senior Advisor with the Progressive Policy Institute, where he leads the What Works Lab. And he came to PPI from the Walton Family Foundation, where he was Senior Advisor for Education. Before that, he was with the N.E. Casey Foundation. And he has held senior positions with several education nonprofits and policy organizations. He also served as U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education for Policy and Planning at the U.S. Department of Education. He writes about education on Forbes.com and is the author or co-author of articles and books, including Charter Schools in Action, Charter Schools at the Crossroads, and The Opportunity to Rise. So we know we're in good hands with you, Bruno, as our moderator today. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Bruno. Thank you.
Thanks for that coming introduction, Mary. Welcome, everyone. Before we start the conversation, I'd like to offer 3 comments to set the context for what we'll do today. The first, as you already heard, this is really the start of a series of ongoing discussions that the campaign will host about the idea of parent curating the child's education. I have an overview of this issue today, and in the follow-up sessions, we'll discuss some of these issues in more detail. So today we'll give an overview. We'll also spend some time to talking about one particular kind of choice that's available to families, which would be open enrollment. The next one will be on September 9th. And there'll be a discussion of parent agency and informed decision making. And then the October one, for which there's not yet a date.
I'm sorry, Bruno. I don't mean to interrupt you, but the audience is having trouble hearing you. Is there any way you can get closer to your microphone, or I'm not sure what the.
I don't know if that's any better.
Yeah, I think the closer you stay to the mic, that will probably be better. Thanks, Bruno.
Mary, last suggestion, if you wouldn't mind going on mute, that might also help the cause. Bruno, are you able to say something now?
So I'm saying this is the first of these three, these general topic. I know this one in September will focus specifically on parent agency. The one in October will focus on homeschooling. So we'll be able to follow up and we'll get information on that. Secondly, language may be a bit high bound. But thinking of parents as curators is really not new. At least I don't think so. Parents are making choices or curating their children's educational experiences almost from day one. Example, choose what books to read to the young children. It's a form of curating, I think. When you not always think about it in those ways and terms. They choose many other educational things for their child during their early childhood years before mandatory schooling begins. And then they help their children make other choices as they move through K-12 schooling and beyond. What might be different with this curating or choosing today is the fact that parents are faced with many more choices about educating their children than they ever been confronted before, and that's part of what we'll talk about today.
Bruno, sorry to interrupt. One more thing. I think, unfortunately, we're still having some audio issues, so I'm going to connect with you off of the Zoom and see if we can work on your audio a little bit. Mary, if you want to continue maybe, and then we can circle back with Bruno once we get him situated.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sierra. Thanks, Bruno. Thanks, everyone. So we want to make sure you hear Bruno because he's doing a great job moderating, and so thank you all for that. So I will go ahead and lead us into our first question. I see Darrell is all ready for us. So thank you, Darrell. So really, we want to start by asking to set the context here. So we want to get a clear picture of this changed landscape in education, understand why it's different today with so many choices, look at what is the size and scope of parent curation in recent years and the trends. So each of our speakers is going to take a turn kind of touching on a couple of these different models of curation, if you will. Darrell's going to start with a couple. He's going to turn it over to Michael, who will then turn it over to Robin, and then Hallie will come in and respond to some of their insights. So Darrell, I'll turn it over to you. And Leah, I think we have a couple of slides for that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I feel like I should have just put my shirt on a chair and let it do the talking based on what the chat is. So it's delightful to be here again, and thank you for inviting me. I know it's only a couple of minutes. I'd just like to set this little preface up, and we might get back to it later. What's happening in America right now in terms of how families are curating, choosing, and assembling their education is actually the intersection of three things that are going on at the local and national policy level. So I would say one is that there is a revolution in school finance happening, and we see this as the most modern weighted student formulas like Tennessee. We see it in the revolution in education savings accounts. refundable tax credits, the federal tax credit, all these other things. So one, there's just like a policy will to experiment with how we pay for education. That's the first thing. Two is that there is all this dynamism in the choice sectors that is blurring the lines between them and creating lots of new optionality, which we'll talk about a little bit in a second. And the third one is that there is a willingness among families to put it all together in ways that are different than they normally do. And I normally describe this as like there's 4 ways that you assemble your education. You either get the bundle, which most people get, you get it with a house, or you get it with tuition, or you do one of those things. You get what I call bundle plus, which is you get the best bundle you can, and then you go all in on like enrichment and tutoring, and there's a lot of studies about that, about the amount of money that wealthy families in particular spend on out of school learning and all this other stuff. You can do what I call the half bundle, which is an emerging area that we see in like hybrid homeschools. We see homeschool families buying courses from charter schools and traditional district schools, that kind of thing. And then you can go your own way, which is most sort of notably linked to the growth of homeschooling and microschooling. So I just want to put that out there. 2 of the sectors that I guess, well, one that is incredibly familiar and one that is incredibly novel are charter schools and microschools. Charter schools are, essentially the go-to choice for most people, and 49 states, I think, is what they 49 states allow charter schools to exist now. They are public schools that are not brought into existence by elected school boards. I've seen all the people in the chat, so I know a lot of people know these things. But they're brought into existence by an authorizer. They are public, but they are privately governed, and they are chosen by families. And if more families want to go to a charter school than there is space, there is a lottery. They've been in existence for a little over 30 years, with the first charter school coming into existence, I think, in 1991 in Minnesota. As you can see, there's 5 states where there are lots of charter schools. I think California has almost 700,000 students in charter schools overall. Across the country, there are almost 4 million students in 7,000 charter schools, with about 200,000 educators serving those kids. And they're popular, particularly among low-income and working-class families of color. The last thing I would say is that charter sectors differ substantially based on what states want to use the chartering device to do with them. So in New York, for instance, we have a lot of charter schools that are very focused on closing achievement gaps for low-income kids of color, because that was the most pressing, though not the exclusive need there. And then you can look at a place like Colorado or Utah or Arizona, or really the West overall, and where charter schools, though they serve that purpose, they also serve the purpose of innovation and just providing more options to more families overall. So that's charter schools with a little bow wrapped on them. The other thing is microschools. So this is kind of the new kid on the block, and it's so new it's actually difficult to nail down. While the sort of concept of very small schools predates COVID, I would say the pod push of COVID, catalyzed by school closures, has been foundational to the growth of this new sector we call microschools, which are basically independently run schools between 10 and 100 kids. There's actually like legislation that defines the lane of microschool is between 10 and 100, so 10 to 99, but we're normally talking about 10 to 20. It is an entrepreneurial sector of education. It is peopled substantially with former public school educators in many places, and Karen McDonald is a person who does a fair amount of research on this. There are lots of entrepreneurial minority women in the sector, and in that respect, it has the character of early child care industry. Anybody who's grown up in cities knows what that is. And I'm actually at a conference for microschooling now. I would just say the much like every other sector of schooling that is new, the rules around microschooling are also new, and there are issues with sort of space and facilities, and a lot of the same things that we've seen in charter school world, but smaller. So thanks for having me, Mary. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Jarrell, and again for joining us in your travels. So I'll ask Michael to come on and share a little bit about a few other models. Thanks, Michael.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me. So the sector I'm going to talk about most is the open enrollment school choice program. So I'll cover that in more detail later, but basically 45 states have some form of open enrollment. And that's kind of broken up into two different kinds: inter-district, which is going to another school district, and intra-district, which is going to a different school within your same school district. The Reason Foundation has done a fantastic job compiling a report that I think we'll be able to put into the chat. They've done open records requests and things like that to try to get data on who some of these students are. And we know from their last report, they were able to find data from 19 states. And we know that 1.6 million students use these laws to attend a school outside of the one that they were zoned to attend. So that could be intra-district or inter-district. And of that, so 3 states make up about 44% of those transfers: Florida, Texas, and Colorado. So this is a growing area in school choice. Some people jokingly refer to it as sort of the gateway drug for school choice, right? You keep it in the public school system, but you get to let parents choose that public school that works better for them. But either way, it's a program that's on the rise, and one that I think that we're excited at Excel and Ed to follow. So a little bit more about that later. And the other area that I'm going to talk about are education savings accounts. And I know that we had ESAs, another ESA panel previously, but basically what an ESA is, it's a parent-directed sort of flexible spending account that receives state dollars that parents can use to spend that money on a wide variety of education options. So tuition, textbooks and fees, tutoring, uniforms, transportation, special needs services, testing services, ACT and SAT, and a variety of other educational expenses. And what sets ESAs apart is from vouchers or other school choice programs. Vouchers generally are for tuition only at, say, a private school, or tuition and fees and sort of uniforms at a current private school, whereas an ESA can be used on a wide variety of other education options. And as Darrell talked about too, there are some other growing school choice programs. The other one is refundable tax credit, and this exists in a couple of other states. The refundable tax credit is basically a parent can spend money on, again, the wide variety of those education options, but then they can receive a tax credit. So either refundable if they don't pay it as much into the tax system, or if they do spend a lot, that's just a traditional tax credit likely to receive on a wide variety of other tax systems. So those are kind of the 3 main ones: ESAs, vouchers, and refundable tax credits. And again, refundable tax credits kind of being that new kid on the block. But ESAs, 19 states have ESA programs, and there are actually 22 total ESA programs. We have to make it complicated. Tennessee has 3 programs, and Florida has 2, so that's why the numbers don't match up. But this is probably one of the fastest growing types of school choice in the country. So we've estimated here at Excel and Ed that about 600,000 students are utilizing an ESA. And we think that next year, that's going to be over 800,000 students utilizing an ESA. Then the crazy thing is that Texas passed an ESA program this year. That goes into effect next year. And we think that an additional 100,000 students will participate in the Texas ESA program. So really fast growing type of school choice across the country. And I will then hand it over back to you, Mary.
Thanks so much, Michael. And as Michael mentioned, he's going to dive a little bit more into open enrollment in a few minutes. So I'd like to invite Robin to join us and share a little bit about homeschooling. Robin has done some really good writing and research on this and her team. So thanks, Robin.
Thanks, Mary, and hi, everybody. Pleasure to join you all today. You might be wondering, why is somebody from the Center on Reinventing Public Education talking about homeschooling? It's a very good question. We've been tracking homeschooling as well as micro schools and all these other options for many years because we think it's really important to take a look at what I think of as the revealed preferences of families and the demand side of education so that we can think about how public schooling, school district, more traditional programs, and even charter schools can be responsive to those motivations and demands. All right, so homeschooling is kind of a tricky area to quantify. It's notoriously unreliable in terms of the numbers out there. And one of the reasons is states are really uneven, as you can see from this slide, and what they require in terms of parents registering as homeschoolers and reporting. Parents don't always like to report on those kinds of things. And then the definitional problem. So, what is homeschooling? As you've heard from Darrell, the rise of micro schools and all these kind of a huge variation of types of options out there have kind of clouded definitions. Do you have to, is it just the parent who's providing the education to be a homeschooler, or can it be a mix of different things through ESAs, et cetera? So for all those reasons, it's tough. However, we do have some numbers, and looking at census data and some federal surveys that have gone in the past here and there, we know that around the 90s, when the first real efforts to quantify this nationally came about, we were at about 2% of families saying that they were homeschooling. By the 2000s, things were increasing up to about 3%. And that's when we were really taking note. And one of the things we saw was a growing diversity in the homeschool movement, which I'll talk about in just a second. And then the most recent efforts to quantify are looking at more like 5%, probably some double dipping with Darrell's numbers around microschooling, et cetera. And importantly, those numbers include families who say that their kids are doing virtual or online education, but at home. So, so that's where we are. Now, in terms of who are homeschoolers, it's probably not what most people think of. It's only about by most estimates, about 60% families who identify as white, about 20% identifying as Hispanic or Latino, and about 10%, 12% Black families. So it's a much more diverse movement than people think, and it's increasingly diverse. So we reported on a growth in diversity in the 2000s. It was notable to me. And then, of course, during the pandemic, a lot of families who had considered homeschooling or just were really unhappy with their current options were kind of forced into homeschooling and decided they liked it, and so stuck with it. So we saw a real rise of Black and brown homeschool pods and micro schools and all kinds of things going on there. So the last thing I'll say is the homeschool movement is really varied just in approach. So you have the traditional homeschoolers with the parents doing the teaching and finding resources to be able to do that. There are many, many homeschool co-ops. Kids are, from my experience, very rarely working at home in isolation of other kids. They're oftentimes very, very social and getting out into the communities through co-op kind of arrangements like pods. That lots of virtual and online, and now much more of the hybrid movement powered by ESAs. So many myths. Homeschooling looks like America increasingly, just, really, really diverse, lots of varied motivations from religious, other values-based motivations to concern about types of education that the kids were getting, or the approach to for a lot of Black and brown families, the approach to discipline or identity that they were experiencing in their district schools. And the explosion, I think, is mostly attributable to this new infrastructure that's rising up to support homeschool or homeschool-like education. Like there are organizations like KaiPods that came out of the pandemic that provide a lot of infrastructure and support, and even a place for families to bring their kids, and providing that help. And of course, all the online resources now. Homeschool families are using AI in very large numbers, it looks like, which is really interesting to watch. So because there are so many new supports in place, the tension points and the barriers to entry for families are lessening. It's not just for stay-at-home moms or dads anymore. That said, I know we'll be talking about barriers, and there still are many issues to work through. So I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Raman. And as we mentioned earlier, our October session in this series will actually return to homeschooling and do a deeper dive. So you all have a strong working knowledge of homeschooling, thanks to Raman. So thank you. Hallie, thanks for joining us. Would love to just ask you to share any additional thoughts from your work and from the Century Foundation about these different options or about the trend overall.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mary. And thanks so much to the other panelists for giving all of that data on where we stand right now. What I wanted to do was zoom out a little bit, because we've been zooming in on some of these trends. And I think it's also important for us to think about how this fits into our bigger education landscape, and thinking about, the 54 million K-12 students in the US. And so, maybe this goes without saying, but I think we need to say in the conversation that the vast majority of students are still attending assigned public schools. That's about 70% of students. That has been relatively steady over the past 20 years. It has declined a little bit, but that's still the case, that big majority of students are in their assigned public schools. And so that just means any policy discussion where we're really thinking about trying to improve educational options for students and families, we need to think about how that fits together in the picture. Another piece that I want to be sure is front of mind is thinking about the fact that arguably the biggest form of school choice right now is one that we haven't talked about much, which is housing. Almost 20% of students come from families that say they moved to their neighborhood for access to the public schools. So that's more than are in private schools. That's more than are using any kind of public school choice combined, charter, magnet, open enrollment, transfer. That's really important to keep in mind. And it's problematic, because we know that choosing a school by choosing a neighborhood is one of the most inequitable forms of school choice, because it's really about where you can afford to live. So that needs to be part of our conversation too. And then I just want to uplift that I think, as we're talking about lots of different models, there's a big difference between public school choice programs and private school choice programs. It's important to start by just understanding the differences in the size and who uses them. We've been talking about growth, but again, to kind of zoom out and remind ourselves like what the big pie looks like, and the size of the slices here. Chosen public schools, so students who are in charter schools or magnet schools or using open enrollment or have transferred to a different district school, make up about 17% of all students. And those students are more likely to be students of color than other students, and they're also more likely to be in cities. Private school and homeschool enrollment is much smaller. Private school enrollment around 10% of all students, and homeschools, as we heard from Robin, 3 growing to 5%. Homeschooling may be increasingly diverse. It's still the reality that it is more likely to be white students. And private school enrollment is disproportionately white students, and more likely to be students who are coming from higher income families. Those are really important things to keep in mind as we're talking about equity and quality control and what it means to have choice that really works to uplift opportunity. I know we're going to talk about that later, but I just wanted to start with that. Zoom out thinking about the landscape.
Thanks so much, Hallie. Yeah, the Century Foundation does such important work to really just think about these issues and the role and vibrancy of our public schools during it. So thanks for that preview for the discussion we'll get into later. So now we want to invite back, well, and before I do this, I just want to update everyone. We're still working with our moderator, Bruno, to try to get him back on. He would really like to be with us. We would like him to be with us. So we'll keep you posted, but we'll carry on, and we're good to keep going. So thanks for your patience. So we want to do a deep dive in this webinar on open enrollment. As Michael said, it's maybe the least contentious of of the models that they shared, or a gateway drug, I think, as you said, Michael. So we want to look at what is the scope of this, what are the types of open enrollment, and Hallie, you shared some good remarks to help us start thinking about the implications of open enrollment as well. So Michael has some slides for us, and then after sharing these, we'll invite our other panelists to weigh in as well, and that'll get us into this conversation about these issues of equity and accountability. So thank you, Michael.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So yeah, open enrollment. If we could go to the next slide, I think Hallie kind of set me up perfectly about to talk about this. Most families choose their choose their schools based on their home, based on the neighborhood that they purchased a house based on their zip code. And so what open enrollment does, it sort of breaks down those barriers and lets families choose a public school outside their zone of attendance. For us at Excel and Ed, we believe that public schools are public schools, and a kid is a kid. They should be able to go to any public school that has capacity to take them. We break this down further into two kinds of open enrollment. And I'm going to be honest with you, sometimes I even confuse these when I talk, so don't feel bad if you have to go through the intra and inter. But intra school district is attending a public school within your same public school district. So again, I live in Indianapolis. I could attend a different school within IPS, the Indianapolis Public School System. That's the school district that I attend. So intra-district, RA, is choosing a school within your same public school district. And inter-district is attending a school outside of your local public school district. So again, I could transfer from IPS to Pike, for example, which is on the northwest side of Indianapolis. So again, it's attending a public school outside your current school district. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So we think that again, kind of looking at how people choose your schools based on your home, we think that open enrollment policies sort of promote equity better by ensuring access to sort of quality education, regardless of what your school's your zip code is. And we think that it further sort of increases diversity and school fit for families, because again, it decouples that schooling conversation from your home value, and that home value also oftentimes serves as a sort of a proxy for your income. So we want to break that down. And again, empowers families by shifting that choice and that power to them to determine what's best for their children. And as we talked about sort of how we have gotten to the education system that we have, we do have to talk about an insidious practice called redlining, and how that has sadly happened a long time ago, but still continues to form some of the school district boundaries that exist today. So we'll talk a little bit more about redlining here in a second. So yep, perfect. Thank you for going to the next slide. So what is redlining? So redlining, so we'll start back. Congress decided that the best way for Americans in the 1930s to create value was for everyone to own a home. So they decided to pass this Federal Home Loan Bank Act to ensure that Americans could better able to afford homes. So they set up the Homeowners Loan Corporation to give subsidized loans to families. And this Homeowners Loan Corporation looked across major metropolitan cities and decided that they were going to classify these neighborhoods based on how advantageous lending to families in these areas were. So some areas they set up as desirable areas, and some areas were set up shown as undesirable areas. You could probably see where this is going, again, back in the 1930s, the most desirable areas, according to the Homeowners Loan Corporation, were predominantly white areas or high income areas. And those areas that were predominantly Black or low income were the undesirable ones. They shaded the desirable ones in green, and the undesirable areas were in red. And that's how we get the term redlining, because they were shaded and outlined in red. This redlining was later outlawed, but these boundaries still remain. A lot of these school districts still have a lot of these sort of red line boundaries. And if we go to the next slide, in my home city of Indianapolis, CFI, the Center for Inquiry 81, is one of these highly desirable schools. Well, you can see where CFI 81 is interspersed in this map from the Homeowners Loan Corporation from 1937, right? Big swaths of green, a little bit more of yellow, and then just a tiny little bit of red. So again, one of the most desirable schools in IPS, highly in this green section. So again, you can go, and Tim DeRoche from Available to All has done a great job finding these old maps and showing where these schools are. Again, I just picked Indianapolis, but you could pick a wide variety of cities, LA, St. Louis, Chicago, and a lot of these sorts of redlining situations still continue to this day. So, we want to break down these historical barriers. So moving on to open enrollment. So about 45 states have some form of open enrollment laws, whether that's inter and intra-district. Other groups will categorize these different and give slightly different numbers. This is the numbers that we've come up with based on our analysis. And if you look on the left-hand side here is the inter-district map. The right-hand side is the intra-district map. And if you're quick, you'll point out that, hey, Michael, if you look at these reds and add them up, they're actually not up to 45 yet. And I have an answer for that. It's the fact that this comes from our School Choice Matters website. We launched this last year in October and November to kind of talk about how different states do school choice programs, where some states are strong and where some states are weak. We are going through the first time of updating these maps. So in the next couple of weeks, these maps will be fully updated based on the newest numbers. But that's where we have right now. So again, the number of 45 is correct, but some of these map are going to be updated in the next couple of weeks. So if anybody's quick, that's why. If you go on to the next slide about where open enrollment numbers stand. Our good partners at the Reason Foundation, again, one of the also foremost experts in open enrollment across the country, just this year have done a report looking at 19 states where we can find robust data on open enrollment. And so they've calculated that about 1.6 million students use these laws. Again, whether that's both inter and intra-district, 1.6 million students utilize these laws to attend a school that's not their zoned school. Florida, Texas, and Colorado account for about 45% of these transfers. And some of the states track income. About 43% of those students were from families that utilize the free and reduced price lunch program. Again, 12% of students have disabilities, and additional data, again, in the report you can read, show that students are transferring from suburban and urban school districts to some rural districts instead. So it's not just going from the rural districts to urban and suburban district. Some of those students are actually transferring to rural districts as well. So again, we've got all these numbers here to look at, but I think broadly, I think what we want to point out is that a wide variety of students are utilizing these programs. Everybody's situation is different, but a wide variety of students are utilizing these types of programs. And we'll talk about a couple other states, Colorado, Florida, and Arizona later on in this presentation. But again, this is a type of school choice that is continuing to grow. And we can see that here in the next two slides. So this breaks out what percentage, what numbers come from inter and intra district. You can see Florida leading the way with open enrollment, but then a lot of blue there, and blues are those inter district numbers. And then the next slide, you can see kind of the growth in these programs. Again, this is all from the Reason Foundation report. Great report. And I'll make sure that we, thank you for putting the link in there. If anybody wants to take a look at that, please do. But you can see that these programs are continuing to grow over time. Again, for the states that we have data, these programs are continuing to tick upward, have an upward trajectory. Talk a little bit about some of the polling. So I used to work at EdChoice, and they have put together a fantastic product here that they've partnered with Morning Consult, where they do a wide variety of polling on, variety of education options. Most of it's focused on school choice, and they do something where they ask adults, and in this question, it's adults in particular, do you support inter-district open enrollment? And they just ask the broad question. And then they give them an example of what it means for inter-district open enrollment. And you can see that underneath here. So when they ask the question, do you, they give them the information about what this program is, and then ask them, do you support this? You can see 7% of adults have some support for this, whether that's strongly support or somewhat supportive. Only 15% have some form of opposition to this. Again, any sort of politician will tell you that these are, sort of crushing numbers when it comes to support for these open enrollment policies. So again, broadly supported by adults across the country. And then I'll talk about, if you go to the next slide, I'll just point out a couple of different states. Try to take a blue and red state. So Colorado, a blue state out there. 200,000 students utilizing open enrollment, which is about 28% of all public school students. 27,000 kids are free and reduced price lunch eligible. 7,500 attended, moved to a rural school district, and 18,000 were classified as students with disabilities. On the sort of a right-hand side, we grade basically states on our School Choice Matters website for how strong their school choice policies are. And if you could go back one more, keep it on Colorado. Thank you. We grade states on this, and it's the stoplight method, right? Green is you've got very robust, the strongest possible programs you can have. Yellow is that you've got room to improve, and red is that you don't have that particular piece here. And you can tell, even with Colorado, right? They've got mandatory inter and intra-district open enrollment. So again, for us, that's a great sign. I think, and that's why we think that some of these numbers are as high as they are, and especially for Colorado. If you go to the next slide, for Florida, we were started in Florida. ExcelenEd was started in Florida and then moved and branched out nationwide. On the right hand, you can see a lot of green there, right? We think that Florida has great policy when it comes to open enrollment. And I'll talk a little bit about the policies in a bit. But again, 275,000 total students participating. About 9% of all Florida students use an open enrollment program to attend a different school other than their zoned one. In Florida, there's also a wide variety of charter schools, private school choice programs. They have one of the biggest ESA programs as well. So there's a lot of school choice options in the state of Florida. And you can see further down, again, more low income than non-low income families utilize these open enrollment programs. But I wanted to draw your attention to the 98% number. So 98% of participants participate in intra-district, right? So within your school district. Well, why is that? That's a pretty high number. If you guys know, so Florida's school districts exist on the county level, right? So big counties makes it hard to get outside of your school district, right? Because they're based on the counties. So most families attend a different school within their county because those are such large school districts. Kind of leaves Florida as it's sort of an outlier when compared to a lot of other states. There's, I think, hundreds of school districts here in my home state of Indiana. The numbers just aren't as high in Florida. So that's where that 98% of students attending intra-district open enrollment exists, just because of the size of those counties. And then Arizona, the next slide. Again, lots of green here. Good policy for open enrollment. 119,000 students utilizing open enrollment, 14% are attending a school outside of their zone 1. 102,000 transfer outside the district. So again, kind of the opposite of Florida, right? Much more compact school districts, makes transportation to get easier to get outside of your school district. So that's why those numbers are a lot larger. And then 17,000 transferred somewhere within their current school district. So you can kind of compare Florida with large school districts compared to Arizona with much smaller districts to see the differentiation between those intra and inter-district open enrollment. So our recommendations, if you go to the next slide. So we grade states based on a couple of different avenues. So the first one is, do you have mandatory inter-district open enrollment? See, I even say inter and intra interchangeably. Inter-district open enrollment. So we believe that all school districts should be able to receive and should receive students from outside their district, as long as there's capacity available. And that is a notable exception for us. Some other groups do not believe that, but as long as there is capacity available, we think that a school district should be able to receive a student from outside the district. So we grade that very highly. The next one is basically the same for intra-district. If you could go to the next slide. We think that as long as there is a spot in a school within your district, that school should receive that student and be able to attend that school. Again, we believe these are public schools. They should be available and open to all children. So we want to break down those barriers and require schools to receive students if there's a space available within that school district. And you can see lots of green on the map. Transfer windows, you're going to start to see a little bit more red here as we go through these next ones. So transfer windows, we believe that a school should receive a student at any point in the school year. And the reason that we believe that is that if I moved into that school district would have to take me at that point that I moved into the district. We think that this should exist for people utilizing open enrollment as well. If I move into the district and they have to accept me, they should have to accept me if I am wanting to attend that school, even if I don't live in that zoned attendance area. So only a few states do that. Most states don't, but that's something that we grade states on as well. Next slide, please. Tuition-free public schools. Again, public schools are funded by tax dollars, and we believe that no student should have to pay tuition to attend either another school in that school district or across district lines, right? So these are funded by property taxes, sales taxes, general income taxes, all those things across the country. So we believe that no student should have to pay tuition to attend another public school. A lot more states here, a lot of green that you can see ban this practice, but we want to make sure that's sort of banned in all 50 states. If you go to the next two, you're going to see a lot more red here. All these open enrollment programs don't mean anything if parents don't know that there's space available. So we think that school districts should be required, broadly speaking, school districts should be required to report available capacity so parents know where there are open seats. We think that should be posted prominently on their websites so parents can find where there's a space available for their students. You can see a lot of red there. A lot of states don't do that, but we're working to change that. Go to the next slide, please. And we want transfer data transparency. So we want lawmakers to be able to see how well these programs are working. So we want to be able to collect some data on them. And most specifically, we want to see if there are school districts out there that are routinely denying students. And we want to be able to figure out why they are denying those students. Might be for capacity reasons, might be for other reasons, but we think that the state should collect this data on open enrollment transfers and publicly report that so we can see how well these programs are working. So again, you can see a lot more red in that. A lot of states don't do that, but again, we're working to change that to bring more transparency to these programs. So hopefully that's a good synopsis and overview for open enrollment. I think we'll have questions and discussions on that, but if there's any Q&A that I haven't been able to get to yet, I'll take a look and respond to your points in the chat. So thank you very much for having me.
Hi, this is Bruno. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Bruno.
Okay, sorry for the problem, but I'll just pick up here. And thanks for your patience as we try to work out the issue. Let me get back to the title of the session, which was parent curation, but there were three words that followed the first part of the session name. Those words were choice, equity, and accountability. And we've spent some time now talking about the choice part of the conversation. But there are two other issues here, or what I'd like to call the three pillars of this parent curation issue. Parents need choices, but choices in some ways should be equitable. And then there's this question about accountability. So let's chat a bit about this. We don't have any order to the people who are on the panel. Does someone want to pick up and talk a little bit about equity and accountability? And Hallie did talk about the equity issue in particular. So someone else want to come in here?
I'll pop in.
Go ahead, Robin. Yeah.
So, our center was really founded on the idea that choice is really essential, but not magic. It doesn't, magically produce better results or accessible, equitable outcomes for students. So we've spent, 30 years sort of working on all areas of choice across the spectrum, but particularly around public school choice. How do we design for equity and accountability, especially when public dollars are involved? So there's a lot to be said here. I think that, one thing to say in response to Michael's comments is we have worked with many districts over the years that were trying to really expand their open enrollment in-district options for families in response to demand, and also with the idea that schools just really should be distinctive and mission-driven and clear about what they're trying to achieve so that they can be held accountable for results, and that they should have the autonomy that goes with that. And so we had this, we've had a model for years that we called portfolio districts offering full sets of opportunities and choices to families, not just a few. So many districts have, a magnet school here, an alternative school there. We don't think that does it. We really think that you have to go full on choice so that every family can have access. But, it's really not easy. And so dealing with questions of transportation, information about how families can choose wisely and find a good fit for their family, can become really wise consumers of their options and make well-informed choices. Just the enrollment system itself, making sure that it's fair, so that when families put in an application, they have a fair shot. Dealing with students with disabilities and other unique learning needs, and making sure that the schools have the capacity and the will to be able to serve those students really well, and that families with kids with unique needs can find the best fit. These are really, really complex things to figure out and get right. And they don't just apply to the public school choices. I think they apply across the board. And that's the work. It's hard, it's ongoing, but it's really necessary. But it can result in really great outcomes for kids.
If I can just jump on what Robin said.
Jerome, maybe you take it next, and then Hallie, and then Michael, if you have any comments.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Bruno. And it is great to have you back. So a couple of things. And for those who don't know about 50CAN, so we're historically accountability people. We do all of this because we care about the fact that low-income kids of color, zoned to chronically underperforming schools, don't have a lot of optionality, don't have access to great teachers, all those things. So all of those things, motivate us. That said, the politics of the word accountability have changed substantially in the last 6 or 7 years, in particular with the reauthorization of ESEA as ESSA. And the bottom has essentially dropped out. And so at best, I would argue what we are in right now is a time of transparency, not one of accountability. There are very few state chiefs, politicos at the federal level, at the local level, who are willing to actually hold anything accountable when the information is made available. Like, we're out of that era of we're going to fire teachers and make them reapply for their jobs. We're going to close schools that we think are underperforming and turn them over to other people. We're going to broadly assign, award choice as a result of objective underperformance on standardized assessments. So I highlight all of this to say that I think the pendulum is going to swing back. But particularly where the choice conversation is concerned, and a lot of the things that Robin said, we should be focusing at the bare minimum on making sure that there is as much information available as possible so that parents can make an informed decision about the kind of school that they want to send their kids to. And in doing so, we have to acknowledge that this is a complicated, emotional, messy process. Trying to find the right match between what the parent likes and values, what the kid aspires to be, what the school is set up to do, and what the teachers and the leader want to make happen. Like, that is a complicated human process, and we should respect that is a part of all of this. So yeah, it's Bruno, to your point, it's complicated. Last little bit on this though. When we're talking about equity, we always have to talk about it compared to what. And Hallie deftly hinted at this earlier today. If you want a system that segregates people by race, income, and location with an efficiency that is almost impossible to undo, you would just set up a public education system like the one we have now that assigns kids to schools based on where they live. So Michael did a wonderful job of setting up all the political history around why we have a system that is like that. If you want something better than that, that's great. Like, we should talk about what the better than that is, but better compared to metaphysical, highly equitable system that doesn't exist. I don't think that's as productive of a comparison for us. So thanks again, Bruno.
Yeah, Hallie, do you have some comments to add here?
Sure, I'll jump in. Darrell, I share your concern and the conundrum that we're in, and sort of the accountability era feels in many ways like it's over, and thinking about how to revive that. I've been trying to think about a shift of thinking about accountability is quality control. And especially when we're talking here about parent choices, it's about making sure that there's some basic assurances of quality. And I think kind of reframing in that way, I'm hopeful we'll come up with some more solutions. The two things that I wanted to inject into the conversation, one is has come up a little bit, and I know that someone's asked a question about transportation. I think that's huge. Choice without transportation isn't really real school choice. And I think that this comes up with charter schools, that it varies state to state what kind of transportation support charter schools have, and that really shapes whether or not it's a live option for all families. It's a huge issue with open enrollment as well. If we don't address that, then it becomes its own sort of gatekeeper. It's not whether you can afford to buy a house in the neighborhood, but it's whether you or grandma has a car and has the time to drive you 45 minutes every day. So I think it's essential to think about policies about that. And I'd also like to think about how we could really try and bake some of the equity concerns into the actual policies for how school choice programs work. And there are a number of public school choice programs that have some kind of weighted admissions that are specifically designed to give priority to students who have the fewest options. One example that I'll point to is a charter school network in Rhode Island that is designed to bring students together from different school districts, creating an option that's different from any of those other ones. Students crossing school district boundaries, And they have a lottery that reserves seats for a certain portion of students from each of those school districts to have geographic balance. And then they also reserve a portion of their seats for students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch to make sure that those students are getting equitable access to this school. So if you really want these vehicles of choice to be opportunities to create new educational options for the students who really didn't have them, then that should be reflected in the design of how the lotteries are run in terms of how we're allocating resources for letting parents know about them. And, you know, currently some school choice programs are doing that, but I would say many of them right now are not.
Yeah, Hallie, you mentioned policy design here as an important element in thinking through this issue. Michael, you gave an example of this, at least I think it was an example, and maybe you can elaborate on it a little bit more generally. When you were talking about it from the moment you talked about policy design, for example, is the district required by the state to publish slots that are available? And where young people end up going to school. And as you think through some of these issues that we've been talking about, there's some sort of policy design issues that need to be kept in mind.
Sure. Yeah. Coming back. You know, again, I think you raised a good point. Like, information is power, and so that's why we want to have those policies out there, and that's something we push for in our model policies, is to require that information, especially for open enrollment, to show where those open seats are, so every family can see where there's availability. The transportation piece, you know, we could spend a lot of time talking about that one. There's 50 states. All of them are going to have different ways of tackling the transportation bucket. In our School Choice Matters website, we actually have a transportation piece where we talk about this. One of the things we want to do is make transportation more flexible, not just the big yellow school bus that drives down the street. We want to have other transportation options that families can utilize. Some states give money for transportation and open enrollment programs to those students. Some states say, hey, if you know the parent is completely responsible for transportation, and some of them say, hey, if you get your student to a bus stop, they can at that point we'll take them the rest of the way and pick them up and drop them off at that bus stop. But to your point, there is a variety of different ways of transportation being handled in the states, and there is no one unified way of the states are handling that. I would say in some of the 2 points in the ESA program, some of them do actually set aside funds for students to use on transportation expenses. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's completely solves the problem, but they have built in some of that funding for students to utilize for transportation. And then the piece on those school choice programs, sort of building in some equity by leaving those most disadvantaged students to receive those funds first. Just this past year, Utah, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Texas have priority for low-income students. They do handle them in different ways, but those states do set aside spots specifically for low-income students first. And if they take up, if in Texas, if it's an appropriations funding, if those low-income students, use all the $1 billion, then no other student receives funding. So they are prioritized, especially in Texas first. So I do think that there are some things that we are trying to do to provide some of that equity. But I will go back to by every one of these regulations that you add to a program makes it harder to administer. So we do want to try to keep these programs as easy to administer and open to families as possible. And I do know that will lead to some complications and makes administering harder. So again, I wish I was a one-handed economist that could say, that there is one sole answer, but I'll say on one hand, we have equity and on one hand, we have administration. So we have to try to balance those. So hopefully we'll be able to find a one-handed economist that can tell us how to balance those things.
Yeah. So
Now, can I?
yeah, go ahead.
Can I add one point just on the policy side? Something we haven't talked about yet is just the supply of quality options. And I think it's really important, certainly within the public sphere. If everybody in a district is fighting over 2 good schools, then you have a real problem on your hands. You have a political problem, you have an equity problem. And so a district that's serious about choice really has to make sure that they're already always curating and building a supply of high quality schools. And you have to do something about the low quality schools, whether you're for accountability or not, it's an issue. And so that's something to be dealt with. And it's even in the private school sphere, you really have to attend to the supply side and think about, how you're going to build up quality, because it just doesn't happen magically, and make sure that you're responsive to the types of things that parents want in their school. So, not just, academic outcomes, but some of the other things that they're looking for.
Can I hop on that? Because I think that's incredibly important. And it shouldn't surprise you that I think something Robin says is incredibly important. But so, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, right? They wrote this book, Abundance, and it's not really about abundance, but it's got a hot title, right? And one of the things I was talking to someone about is that the book doesn't really take on education. And abundance is actually like a good way to think about what Robin just proposed, because what we have right now is a scarcity approach to new school creation, good school creation, right? So for instance, let's for all the New Yorkers in the house. So there is absolutely nothing special about having a freshman class at Stuyvesant that is like 738 kids. There is nothing special about that. When you look at the number of kids who test high enough on the SHSAT to get into Stuyvesant, it is outrageous that no one has taken the position that we should found a second campus. We should make, why would you not do that, right? And so the entire sort of inertia of school creation is pro-scarcity. And what we need is an anti-scarcity agenda for choice, right? So it's not really abundance, it's anti-scarcity. And all of the things that we've been talking about today, I know we spent a lot of time talking about open enrollment, as we should. You can use each of them as a way to promote another type of excellence on the choice continuum. Charter schools give you a certain kind of thing. Magnet schools give you a certain kind of thing. Open enrollment gives you a certain kind of thing, right? Independent schools give you a certain kind of thing. Micro schools give you a certain kind of thing. The challenge is most people bet on one of them, and not all of them. So I just want to throw that out there, because I think if we want to get to this place and Robin's point is a good one, where there are more good schools that people want to go to, that they're desirous of, then you have to take signals from them about what they want, and you have to decide to do more of it. And that is that energy is difficult to sustain given the politics of our traditional education systems.
Questions before we move to audience questions. And I'm going to try to wrap this into the recent.
Bruno, sorry to interrupt. It seems like maybe we're having a few audio issues again. So, Mary, are you okay to hop on maybe and see if we can work through these questions? Oh, you're muted. Though I think we can hear you, but you're just muted.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let me, if someone was about to respond to what Darrell was just saying, please go ahead while I look up the audience Q&A. We can keep the conversation going if someone wanted to add something else. If not, I wanted to, while I'm pulling up any Q&A, we did want to also ask our panelists today about a recent federal action that is kind of another layer on this conversation, and that is the inclusion of the federal tax credit for scholarships for students to conceivably use that to go to private schools. And, just wanted to ask you all, feel free to, forever to start, to what extent does this perhaps complicate this conversation? What do you think this might mean? It's confusing even for people who follow policy to understand what this means. You know, this money, for example, won't go directly to families like other options we've talked about. It's going to go to nonprofits that then grant it to students. So there may be equity and even accountability issues with that. So what do you think? What does this mean? What do you think this means in this broader context of this conversation you're having? Whoever wants can jump in.
Yeah, I can go first, and I know just enough to be dangerous because this is really like it's so new, like the things are sort of and the rulemaking's not done or whatever. So here's what I would say. I would say that the level and use of the federal tax system are the novel portions of this. The implementations of it are actually fairly well known, just not bundled up quite as they have been. So there are states that have tax credit scholarship programs. Pennsylvania, is one of them. There are states that have individual credits for tuition, tutoring, lacrosse sticks, whatever. Think Minnesota. There are states that let you take a personal credit for like a gift to a public school, like a public education fund, like in Arizona, right? So what the federal tax credit is a multi-use ESA that is funded by a tax credit to individuals in the federal tax code now. It is unlimited and it does not sunset, but it's only $1,700 a person. So let's say you wanted to put $1 billion in the pot so that scholarship granting organizations across the country could give out scholarships for tuition, tutoring, a bunch of other things. Or public schools or charter schools could do this too, because everybody is sort of eligible. It would take 588,000 people to get to $1 billion, right? So it's when corporate contributions were in it originally, it was like a Wall Street, you go to a big company, you say, fill up the pot. Now it's like a Main Street thing. You got to ask a bazillion people to do it. The one thing that is that makes this difficult, it's not the right word to describe it. The one incredibly confounding aspect of this is that governors have to opt their states into the program. And so, New Jersey could just be like, no, we're not doing it. And one of the candidates has said, I'm doing it already, basically, and the other one has not said anything. So that means that the kids in New Jersey, if the governor says no, they can't get any benefit from this at all. But what that doesn't mean is that the people in the state don't get to take the credit. And so a governor is in the position of saying, okay, I can either say yes and have some input on what the scholarship granting organizations are, which is like a whole nother fight, right? And keep charity in my state, or I can say no, and people can send their charitable donations to an SGO in another state. And that's a political question. So this thing is like as novel as novel. There are no kids in it for anybody in the chat yet. I mean, this is like 3 weeks old, basically, but we're all very interested in seeing what happens with it.
Anyone want to add it? Hallie?
Well, I'd love to jump in. I mean, if I were advising a governor, I would tell them not to take it because I think public dollars should go to public schools because I really see that as the only way that we get quality control and that we get those controls over equity and access. And so I think there are a lot of questions about how it'll play out. If it plays out like some more traditional voucher programs, then I think we'll probably see the same trends that it disproportionately benefits students who are already in private schools, who are more likely to be white, who are more likely to be high income, and allows those schools to use those funds without a lot of transparency, using public dollars, and we don't know how it's being spent, and we don't have good information about outcomes for students. And if the goal is to have a more flexible ESA that parents, could be public school parents who are spending on tutoring or on supplies, I think we do really need to use public money to support parents and to make it easier to raise kids. It's hard and it's really expensive, but I don't think that's the right vehicle for it. I think we have proposals for an expanded child tax credit. Like that really puts money in the hands of parents and lets them spend it on tutoring if that's what they need, or on braces if that's what their kids needs. So, you know, I think it's a really a dangerous vehicle that doesn't have the quality control and the equity that we need.
So I would just add that, you know, I think many states are going to say yes to this opportunity. And we need to make sure that, you know, governors think about how to put some guardrails in place. They'll be choosing who is the nonprofit organization. They need to choose wisely. And as far as I can tell, and I'm with Darrell, this is still emerging, yet to be determined, vague language, you know, we're waiting for rules and all that. But governors do have the opportunity to shape this quite a bit if they decide to opt in. And so, you know, they potentially, I don't know, Darrell, Michael, Hallie, you may know, a governor, I think, could decide to restrict the use of funds potentially to tutoring, supplemental services. You know, there may be ways to sort of position districts and charter schools to be able to receive these funds and just complement the types of education that kids are getting, so that kids who opt into neighborhood schools still have some choices and opportunities outside that to supplement. And I think advocates have a really important role here to be able to say, you know, if our state does this, this is what we want it to look like. But you know, the reality is we're going to have a blue state, red state divide for the most part, and that's going to be layered on top of a divide that's already happening with a lot of red states opting into other forms of private school choice. So it'll be an interesting experiment. I'm really pragmatic around it. Like, you know, if a state's going to go for this, let's make it as equitable and effective as possible. And other states should consider whether it can help us achieve our goals for kids.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, it's kind of TBD on how it will all work out. And at the federal level, there may also be some regulations and rulemaking around this. So that could be an opportunity for advocates to weigh in on how you want to see this shaped and priorities and so on. And so always a good reminder to weigh in on that as you feel compelled. I want to ask a question in the chat from Maribel, and then if there's no other questions, end on a question about how do we make this possible on the ground, these options for students and families. So the question from Maribel is about, you know, the teacher shortage issue, and how do we square that with increasing options? You know, what are the tensions there? If teachers could make more money, you know, at a charter school or somewhere else, and some of those equity and accountability issues. What are your thoughts on that? Anyone can start.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. You know, I think as Darrell kind of talked about the microschooling landscape, a lot of those founders are licensed teachers in the state, and so you know, I think when we talk about, you know, this being an ability to bring educators back into the education space, they can set up, you know, a micro school, or in an ESA provide services, whether that's, you know, they teach a particular class, a variety of classes, or provide tutoring on top of that. It helps bring in those folks that can provide the services that those teachers feel that they're best able to provide, and they already have a leg up compared to a lot of other folks. So I think for me, the way that I look at that is that it kind of breaks down that a teacher must be in a brick and mortar school at a particular time, but it expands those options where those teachers can provide the educational services that they're trained for to students in different ways. And so to me, that opens up the possibilities for education, not just one person in a school, in a classroom, in front of 30 students or whatever, but to provide more of the services sort of holistically and in different ways. So that's how I see this factoring in.
Yeah, I think Michael's, so I've worked on this a lot. We were multi-issue at 50 Can, and I would just say the tensions are, if you want to reduce class size, for instance, right, you necessarily have to hire deeper into the pool of teachers, right? Because it's like a dollar. Like you can't spend a teacher twice, right? So what we do know and what we don't normally talk about is that as much as one size doesn't fit all for a kid, it doesn't fit all for a teacher as well. And so when I'm talking about expanding options, whatever, I'm also talking about expanding the places, people, modes, methods, and topics that an adult who wants to pursue education as as a life passion can engage in. And so I think this is good for kids and good for teachers. I think the question of like how we want to deal with like certification and all these other things, because this actually is to Michael's policy tension, this does require two hands from an economist. On one side, the higher the bar is, on the other side, the fewer people will get over that bar, right? And this is, I'm not like trying to take a side on this. I'm just trying to say that that is real and not easily going to go away. So the challenges of bringing new teachers into the profession are incredibly important. And I think that giving teachers more options about where they want to be is one strategy to help recruit and retain people into the profession.
I too am on board with the need to sort of reimagine the role of teaching. We saw during the pandemic when we studied pods that, parents and students really liked the pod environment, but teachers really, really loved it. And many of them said, I'm not going back to what I had before because the one teacher, 30 kid classroom model is broken. It's just a broken model. It's unsustainable for teachers. It's ineffective in terms of meeting kids' needs. So I think there's a lot of opportunity that opens up right now when we think about, some of the approaches that micro schools are taking, relying on what they call guides rather than the traditional teacher role, a lot to watch for, a lot to, help with, but schools of education really need to figure this out fast. And I'm in one, and my dean agrees. And, ASU is really trying to get resources out to educators wherever they are teaching and take the learnings that are being developed at ASU and get them out in lots of different ways to homeschool families, to micro schools, et cetera. I think that area is really rich, really necessary, and is unlikely to happen in most ed schools. So we need to make it happen.
That's a great point, Robin, about schools of ed paying attention and learning from, why parents are curating in this way and what teachers are saying they want more of and less of. And while that all of it may not be possible transposed onto a public school system, what can schools of ed and school systems take from that to make it more attractive to be a teacher? Yeah. So Darrell, I want to direct this question really quickly to you, then end with a closing question. So this is Melanie's question in the Q&A box about accountability with charter and micro schools in Ohio. They're classified as their own districts. So there's the numbers are so small sometimes that data is masked or unavailable. Is that an issue elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an issue since NCLB. Because maybe like 3 years into NCLB, when the data started coming out, putting Tony suburban schools on the not meeting AYP list, there was a strong push at the state level to change the N size for the data that would be reported so that small groups of minority kids in overwhelmingly white schools would not tag the whole school as needing improvement. So I would just say that this is a really good question. The question of student identity with really small N sizes is a serious one. I just think that how we talk about not charter schools, but ESAs, micro schools, pods, all the smaller things, and how we're going to measure that given size is a new question. And we're like 4 years into this, and it's going to take a little more time than now. So
I want to end with a hopeful question that'll also help bridge us to the next session in September. And the topic in September will be digging more into this question about what kinds of information and access do parents really need to fully maximize these new options, and in a way that, as you all so well talked about, honors what their children need and want as well. And so, Robin, I'm going to pitch it to you first, since you inspired us to end with this question, this possibility question. What do you think it's going to take at the state, local, ground levels? What do you think parents need to take advantage of this?
I mean, parents need rich information. We know this from studying charter schools and other choice options for so long. There are great models for getting that. I've seen some amazing models, even in Detroit, with a team of parents who went in and did kind of looked at schools from a variety of perspectives that they wanted to know about, kind of Yelp models. I will say that, you know, the barrier to that is we're not getting a lot of just solid data on private school choice to be able to help get that back out to families. And so states really need to figure out what are some solid ways to make sure that parents can be really wise consumers of their options. But this is a great opportunity to figure out what, you know, what information parents really value and how we can make sure that they get it, whether they're choosing private, public, or something in between.
Love anyone else's quick thoughts on this.
I'll just say, I think
Go ahead. Go ahead.
quick that I think systems often do what they actually were designed to do. If we want equity and opportunity to be part of this, that should be baked in, which to me looks like having outreach plans that acknowledge the different resources and realities of families, that look at a student's socioeconomic background, and that's, you know, baked into who gets priority for which different types of admission too.
I was just going to quickly add that the Florida ESA program has something cool where they have parent navigators that will help families navigate navigate the program, help them find micro schools or a charter school or, you know, private school, whatever, you know, another public school district will help them find those options and then help create a learning plan for each individual student. So they're trying to think through some of those areas, at least in Florida, and I think it's going to happen in other states.
Darrell, any quick words on this?
I'll have what Robin's having.
Great, yeah. Thanks, Darrell. And Hallie, I just want to underscore what you said. You used the word design earlier, so I think you're trying to speak to really the intentionality of all this. So thank you for sharing that, and all of you, thank you so much for being here. To our amazing panelists, and to Bruno, we really appreciate you as well. And sorry you couldn't join us for the full thing, but really grateful to everyone. Really want to quickly show this August rebroadcast schedule as you're going about your month of August at the beach or wherever. Check out these rebroadcasts, and they're all great content there, and it's on our website. So thank you so much again. We'll have the recording available soon. And this last slide, want to highlight in particular the follow-on conversation from today on September 9th. We'll be digging more into this question about how do we support parent agency and informed decisions. You got a little preview just there from our panelists about what it's going to take. So thank you all so much again for joining. Thank you to our amazing panelists and to Bruno, our moderator, and our team, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Take care.